states are often pegged to the federal rate, right? Now, Bush had his tax cuts for the wealthy 2 rounds. And now Vermont chose not to peg its rate with, sort of maintain Clinton era. How did that work?
In 2002. In fact,
that's called decoupling.
That's when the 40% exclusion for capital gains was done. It was part of the deal. There's always a deal.
Right.
But there was another point you made earlier about the embedded assumption in this question about taxes is not just that we don't want to penalize the rich, but they believe that the wealthy are the ones who create jobs, and that lower taxes, both corporate and personal, will be good for job creation, both in state and because it'll help us attract jobs.
You mean those are beliefs and not facts? Those are actually ideology.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a couple of things come to mind. First, without being disrespectful, a number of the people who are very wealthy do not own businesses. They own stock and bonds and other assets that produce income.
Right.
Now, it may be producing jobs somewhere. Chances are it's not here.
Sure.
If you're worth a couple $100 million and you have a typical portfolio of assets, you'll find, if they would show it to you, that almost none of it is invested here. You might have a little bit of state bonds here, VHCB, or,
you might renovate your McMansion and create some,
I don't want to demonize them. They're just folks, but most of that money is elsewhere. The asset base is elsewhere. There are some wealthy people who do own businesses here and create jobs, and thankfully they do. But the idea that all rich people are job creators is ludicrous on its face. Second, the notion, and this is a widely held belief, the notion that our savior, the white knight, I shouldn't say white, that's sort of a racist thing. The savior is outside, and if only we were more welcoming, then all of those businesses who were rushing around, counting their pennies would come to Vermont instead of going to Iowa or Arizona.
How do we attract them? How do we attract them? That kind of...
Right. Well, that too is based on a deeply flawed assumption that that level of activity is A, significant, and B, that state taxes make a difference to however many of those there are.
Sure.
The fact is there is almost no data, there is no public data on the movement of businesses between states in this country, which is a staggering data gap.
Okay.
Fortunately, there is a private data set that's based on Dun & Bradstreet data, which is a massive sample, not even a sample. Millions of businesses are in the Dun & Bradstreet data set. So if you look at that data, which I did for Vermont, and now you can do it for other states as well through a foundation, you find a very curious thing. Now, I've seen the same analysis done in at least 3 states. California, which is where I learned about this data set. I did it here, and I just did it for another client for Pennsylvania. Each time the same thing came up. The number of businesses and jobs that move is very small. Second, in the course of a year, there's a lot of churning in capitalism. Jobs are created, jobs are destroyed. Businesses open, businesses close, businesses expand, businesses contract. That is where the action is. The number of jobs related to the net of interstate business movement is about 2%. Yet that's what we constantly hear.
The relocation, let's get them here,
We have to be better so they'll come here.
Right.
When instead, not surprisingly, we should focus on the businesses that are here and meet their needs, which is not about the tax code. And that's the other point. The other assumption, as I mentioned, is that state taxes matter. It's very clear in the literature that of the major cost factors for businesses, taxes are at the bottom. Labor, which is obviously why the Rust Belt lost a lot of jobs in the 70s and 80s to the South and the Southwest. Not only were they non-union states, but they were lower wages. Ultimately, those states have themselves lost jobs to Mexico and China. It's about labor costs. But these folks would have you believe that it's those damn state taxes. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, they can then, with that argument, go according state to state and see which best deal they can get. And
it's become a very big industry. There are location consultants who do that. They will go pump up South Carolina against Tennessee, and Vermont's not a big enough player, but that allows a company to come to the Economic Progress Council, for example, and say, we just got an offer from New York. Meet it or we're gone. This is blackmail. And furthermore, as the mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, who knows a little something about making money, said any business that makes important long-term decisions based on local tax breaks won't be in business very long. And by the way, there was a great example of why this is all, or can often be baloney. Dell got $300 million from the state of, I think, North Carolina, and they just closed the whole plant and cut 2,000 jobs.
And they hold that tax credit they got, or their bonus.
It's just not a very cost-effective way.
Now, how is the state of Vermont sort of played that game? That comes out of the Economic Progress Council,
right.
And they.
There was a program set up in, I think, '97. Howard Dean advanced it. A number of people liked it, but I believe it was part of a deal to get Act 60 passed, which was the education funding, the first of. It's been revised a few times.
Okay.
I believe that's how it happened, and I know that's when it happened. And at first, they were tax credits. It was called the EATI, the Economic Advancement Tax Incentive. And the state was very clever, actually. They said, look, ours is different than other states. We don't just throw money at people. You have to perform in order to get these credits. We will award you an amount that you can earn.
Based on job creation?
It's payroll, mostly.
Okay.
You have to expand payroll.
Right.
And also some capital investments and some other stuff. But it was mostly about payroll and jobs.
And that's actually pretty stringent compared to other states who just say,
well, that's the funny thing.
We'll...
For the first few years, nobody, the tax department obviously were the ones who had to process the credits. The company would come back a year later and say, well, we did what we promised to do. Can we use the credit? In the first couple of years, the tax department wasn't set up to actually verify that they did what they were supposed to have done. There were no specific agreements between the council, the recipient company, and the tax department. The auditor had to point out that there was a problem. And that's been the history of this program. The auditor, to his credit, originally Ed Flanagan, and I was the principal author of the first review of VEPSI, then Liz Reedy. Randy Brock didn't want to criticize VEPSI. And even Tom Salmon last year put out a decent report. And they've had a lot of findings that have pointed out the serious problems with this program.
Okay.
And the legislature has on occasion responded, but they did finally respond in '06, I think, and they changed the program from tax credits. Now it's essentially a rebate on the company's payroll taxes, which I think is worse. But they tightened up a bunch of the technical things. But nevertheless, there was one core question that the legislature, policymakers must always ask. If we're going to spend this money, whether it's $1 million or $100 million.
That's what I was wondering. What's the scale? How much money are they?
Well, they've already awarded over $100 million.
Okay, and
I think about 60 of that has been earned. Another 10 or 15 is being held by the companies because it's a carry forward. If you don't use it in 1 year, you get to hold it for a while. Okay. The new one's a little bit different than the old one, but it's over 100 million and 60's already gone. So, but anyway, the point is, they created this program. The different auditors have published reports very critical of it. Modest changes have been made, but they have not yet called the serious question. Is this the most effective way to use that $100 million in foregone revenue? Because that's called a tax expenditure. If you appropriate $100 million, people say, oh, you spent it. But if you create a program that says you're not going to collect the $100 million, that's no different.
Right.
So anyway, the process, in my view, is not working very well because there are a number of programs and policies that were born a year ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. They are not always reviewed for effectiveness as rigorously and as regularly as they should be. But at some point you have to say, gosh, we did this. How's it working? Because if it's not working well, you have a choice. You can either ignore the problem, if there is one. You can try to tweak it and make it better. You can say, that didn't work. Let's be honest. Let's try something else.
Okay.
They're not very good at that.
Right.
Once things start, they just have a life of their own. And you build, there is a constituency of beneficiaries who cry like crazy, including the bureaucracy itself. So, and this case is a perfect example of that because, in my view, this is the time to do a very serious review of the whole program. We're in the middle of a fairly serious recession. Lots of businesses have cut jobs. That's what you have to do sometimes if you don't want to go out of business. You have to trim. So this is not demonizing the businesses. A number of large businesses in Vermont were VEPSI recipients in the 90s and early 2000s. And even if you leave aside the bizarre question about the but-for, which is so subjective and can't be audited, then you are left with the question. You started with 100 jobs. You said you would create 10. That means you should have 110 now because we gave you $1 million, whatever it was.
Sure.
But wait, Now, not only did you have to cut those 10, but you cut 10 more. You're down to 90. So wait, we paid the $1 million
For a net
for
loss
jobs that don't exist anymore.
Net loss of 10, yeah.
The point being, again, not to demonize the companies, but to say, look, the bottom line is the business cycle is going to overwhelm these programs
Any kind of
every
tax credit
single
incentive
time.
thing, right?